Thank you so much for joining us for session 2. Thank you for coming to this session. We are going to be talking about empowering end users. We're going to be taking a journey, right, from IT-Centric to self-service data and analytics. So we're really talking about that self-service and automation. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jay Lindeman. I'm an advisor, business intelligence. I work for Priority Health. My job is analytics solutions architecture, focusing on automation, self-service. Priority Health is a healthcare payer, so my responsibilities are financial modeling, trying to map out pricing for our network plan for our providers, looking at the flow of money as it goes back and forth between a health insurance company and a health provider. So the part that is the really sexy part of healthcare, right? And then in my spare time, I am the Tableau trainer for Corewell Health, and I'm also an Alteryx evangelist. So those are my two preferred platforms. So if you get to work with those, you get to have a lot of fun, right? Priority Health is the second largest healthcare payer in Michigan. We are owned by Corewell Health, and if you know Corewell Health, 2 years ago, Spectrum Health on the west, Beaumont on the east merged together, formed the largest employer in Michigan for Michigan-based employees, and created the largest healthcare system in our state. So it's exciting to be able to participate in that. Priority Health itself services over 1 million Michigan residents, so we're pretty proud of that, and we're on an upward growth trajectory, so you'll continue to see our presence get bigger and bigger and bigger over time is our goal, right? So a little bit of an overview. I put this in here. This is the abstract. I don't expect you to read this. I'm not going to read it to you. But let's distill this down. We're talking about self-service. We're talking about automation. We're talking about how to do more with the resources that you have right now. We need to advance our capabilities without having to add to our capital or add to our employee expenses. And we're going to talk about how we got there and how we do that. So we're breaking this down into a few sections, right? We're going to start with the self-service overview. We're going to understand what it is for those who are newly introduced to data and analytics. We're going to talk about why it's beneficial, why it's valuable. We're going to talk about barriers. So my friend Chris here talked about going negative first. We're going to do the same thing. We'll then move into what our process looked like, how we turn that into a solution, and then time permitting, if I don't ramble on too long, we'll talk about an actual use case for Priority Health and how we turn this into action. All right, so let's start with that overview. Self-service and automation. We need to break this down into pieces. We need to talk about truths and myths, right? So we need to begin by understanding that self-service and automations is insights on demand. If you are a data-driven decision company, you have got to be able to make decisions quickly. You cannot wait for 1 to 2 weeks for a ticket to be put in, for a team to prioritize and to decide whether or not your initiative is as important as their other initiatives. You need near or real-time information. So insights on demand. Mindset matters. Your organization needs to be ready for self-service and automation, and you need to be ready to build it. If you don't have both of those things, you're not going to succeed. There has to be a receptiveness and there has to be a willingness to build. And the last one I think is kind of obvious. It's an efficiency booster. So let's talk a little bit about myths. It's only about technology. That's not true, right? Technology is how we get there. But what we need to do is challenge ourselves and to think about this as information readiness. So information can come through your data. It can be made available through your technology. But it can also be how you make your domain information available to end users. It can simply be knowledge articles, standards of work. It can be wikis. It can be internal policy holding repositories. It can be so much more than just the platforms. Development is costly. Little bit of a misnomer here, right? It does take initial investment, right? There is money that you're going to have to put forward in order to get here. But as all of you know who are in this space, it will cover its cost almost immediately when you deploy the first successful solution. So we shouldn't be focused on cost. It's something we have to keep in mind, but it shouldn't be a barrier. And the last one, I might get a little flack for this one. Optimization equals automation, as in optimization does not equal automation. I would say automation is a component of optimization, but optimization isn't inherently automation. I cannot tell you how many times I interact with people who say, I automated this thing because I reduced a component of this, and when I push the button, it does it a little bit faster. And I say, but you still had to push the button, right? So we want to make sure that we're understanding when we talk about automation, we're going really beyond just retooling and making it a little bit better. All right, so we need to talk a little bit about benefits. There's a bunch of them, and there's probably more than what's on this list. When we think about automation and self-service, consistency. You have the same output happening over and over and over again, and it's predictable in that way. Your speed of insights is going to go up. You can make information ready faster. We can scale solutions. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? If we think about healthcare and serving one provider or provider system, what if that solution can be scaled up to all the provider systems? What if we prototype with one and then expand that out to others? In that way, we're increasing productivity. I think that one's pretty obvious. Turns out your quality and governance people really love automation and self-service. And the reason for that is kind of interesting, right? A lot of times we build solutions and then we document afterwards, right? We all absolutely document every single time after we're done, right? When you think about automation and self-service, you're thinking about things in a lot greater scale. What that does is it forces you to consider the process and policies ahead of time. It forces you to deal with how the data is available right now. Fundamentally speaking, you're considering quality and governance at the front, which means you're more likely to actually do it. Elevated satisfaction, your customers get insights faster, they get their information quicker, better, more reliable. Their happiness factor goes up, right? Liberation of resources is an interesting one. We're really talking about that one from the perspective of the development team. We have resources who may be churning out reports, simple on-rails reports, time and time again. That's not a very exciting job. It can be boring. It can create dissatisfaction. So by presenting solutions that offset some of that work and displacing that into something more exciting, in that way we are liberating those resources to do more valuable things. And then lastly, reduced operating cost. I think that's an obvious one as well. So types of self-service and automation. These are a few that came from my mind. This is not an exhaustive list, right? So at the top we have applications. These are things that allow interactivity back and forth. You can put in some prompts, you can get some answers back. Data visualization is a big one, right? We're aggregating and summarizing data, putting it into visuals, helping people extract insights, helping them make decisions going forward. From a database perspective, for all you data engineers, we're talking about jobs, procedures, and tasks that make data available when you need it to be available and working behind the scenes so that it's automatically available for your analysts to do something with. And scheduling. So schedulers are key to this process. If you don't have a scheduler, how can we accomplish true automation and get ourselves out of button pushing? And then the last one, and I'll add to alerts and notifications and talk about that information readiness. So how you store your domain information, how you make that available, how you alert people that new information is available. That's a big part of our automation solutions. All right, so barriers to achieving success. This is where we get, Chris, negative, right? When we think about why automation and self-service isn't successful, we have to consider the idea that there are 4 components to why this doesn't work. If automation and self-service is so obvious in terms of its value proposition, why isn't every company, division, team engaging in building these solutions, and why isn't it happening in totality across the organization, right? It's because there are these barriers, and there's 4: emotional, physical, structural, and mental. So emotional, this is that whole AI is gonna take my job, right? I'm gonna talk about that a little bit. But it's the feelings-based side of why I don't wanna give something up because that makes me less valuable. Physical, what platforms do you have? What software systems do you have to actually accomplish this goal? What can you build within to accomplish automation, right? Structural is more about the data. Where is it? Is it in a variety of different locations? Do you have to join it together? Do you have layer problems? Do you not have presentation? Do you not have refinement? So your data may not be in a state that is conducive to automation and self-service. And then mental, that's the skills and training that you as a developer or you as an end user need to have in order to either build or interact with these solutions. So we're gonna go into this a little bit further because I think it's important for us to understand the problem so that we can work our way through to the solution. Job security, threats to livelihood. We need to retrain our brains to think about automation. We are really, really good at churning out specific reports. we are not necessarily good at translating those things into scaled solutions. So we have to change our mindset and how we approach the problem fundamentally. But at the same time, we have to understand that we are threatening people's jobs, right? We are threatening what they do to earn their 40 hours of pay. And we need to be very mindful that that fear is going to cause resistance. So we need to overcome that by helping people through that. And we need to be aware of that. So fundamentally, when we think about emotional, we just need to convince people that it's reasonable to depart from the mundane. We need to evolve them, right? That's the key here. Physical barriers. So this is the platforms part, right? We know that there's visualization tools. We know that we have report builders, workflow management, and schedulers, right? So I'm curious, here's my one interactive part. Out of all those tools over there that you see, how many of you as developers have access to 5 or more of those, show of hands? Okay, keep those up. Let's up the number. How about 10? Yeah, to give you a second to count. I've still got a decent number of hands up there, right? Which is really cool. How many of you use a tool that's not up there? Right. The point being, there's a ton of tools out there. They all cost money. They all take time to train. The neat thing, though, is with as many as there are out there, chances are you have access to at least a few of them to be able to translate that solutions-oriented mindset towards. When we talk about structural barriers, we are talking about data models, data layers. You can see an example. There are a variety of different schools of thoughts on data layers that go from a couple to like dozens of them. It's not really necessary for you to understand what data layers are, except to know that your ability to perform in this space is going to depend on the refinement of your data. You may need to work with your digital services people. You may need to work with data engineering to get the data into a state that you can do something with it. And that matters because you all know that if your platform isn't tuned to be able to look at a Microsoft SQL Server and join that to Oracle or reach up into the cloud with Snowflake, you're not going to be able to create a solution around that. So you may need assistance to get your data in the same space before you can build on top of it. So availability, quality matters. Sometimes you have restrictions or limitations because of data team roles. Sometimes you're not allowed to do data engineering. Much as we want to as an analyst, we have to separate those roles because of quality and governance. So sometimes that can be a barrier. And then we just talked about environments and servers. The last one is mental barriers. So we're talking about knowledge and training, skills, capabilities. Again, we need to think about things in a scaled way instead of an ad hoc way. And really important, this number 4 here, customer readiness. You can build things all day long. If they're not ready to use them, they will not use them, right? And so we have to keep that in mind. We have to mind not only the development cycle, but we also have to understand whether or not our customers, our executives are ready to consume this information and let go of that crutch, which is all of you wonderful developers. So we've illustrated the problem. We've been a little negative. Now let's flip that. How did we at Priority Health get through this cycle? How did we change that culture? We had to understand that our audience was twofold, developers and users. We had to choose projects that balance value and time savings. We had to ensure that we were building the solution in the right platform. We had to understand what was within our capabilities. And we're going to talk about these things in a little bit more detail. And we really spent a lot of time on convincing the end user that it was worth liberating themselves from those ad hoc reports where we have hyper specificity in the exact deliverable that can't be used anywhere else because it is that refined, right? And there's not really that much value in that. We can solve a lot more problems with the time invested to developing a solution. We had to convince the customer that that was going to be okay for them. That was a hard sell. We also needed to consider change management. Has anybody seen this model before, the ADKAR model? At its foundation, what we're talking about is 5 components to change management: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. When you have all 5 of these things, you will have change. This is how you change culture, by minding these 5 things. Underneath the green bar, what we see is if we take awareness away and we have the rest of them, what do we get? We have confusion. We don't know what's going on. We don't know why we're building what we're building. Swap that out with desire. No desire, but you have awareness, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. You're going to get resistance. These are the people that say, well, this is the way we've always done it. I don't want to change because I'm comfortable. I don't fundamentally have any motivation, so I'm resistant. The third one is probably the most damaging. If you take away their knowledge, even if they have an ability or a desire, you're going to create anxiety. You're going to create fear. That is the outcome of removing knowledge. And so on and so forth, right? We take away ability, you get frustration. And then for long-term goals, reinforcement. You can't just build it and let it sit. You need to reinforce. You need to check back in. You need to make sure that you don't get backsliding, right? Because that can kill your automation and self-service goals because people will not buy in if you don't reinforce this stuff. Change management is everything when you're making that evolution. And it's something we have to keep in mind. All right, this slide is a little dense. I'm not going to go through it in its entirety, but what I want you to focus on is the left side versus the right side. The luxury around this is breaking down how to eat an elephant, right? When you think about getting into self-service, when you think about getting into automation, there's a lot of things you need to keep in mind and you need to do. Hopefully this can give you a little bit of a framework to how you can enter into that. We're going to focus on these, the green circles with the black outline there. We'll go a little bit further with that. But the left side is something that you do maybe twice a year, right? Every year you revisit this. The right side of it is when you actually come up with a list of initiatives that you're willing to tackle, and you go into that loop of development cycle. So left side, rare, right side, every single project. All right, for us, the journey began with understanding and choosing the right platform. We know that from our little exercise before, there's a lot of different platforms and there's a lot of different options. How many people in the Tableau space see dashboards built that are big honking crosstabs? We use them, we've seen them. Why does that happen? It happens because people want refresh data available to them, and that's the only platform those analyst teams have been given to provide data to the end user, so they're hijacking Tableau to accomplish that goal. It's not what it's intended for, it's not what its value proposition is for, but you see it because people are getting creative. So they're solving a problem in a way, but they're not really doing it in the best way possible. So understanding what you have and what is best in each of these categories is really relevant to how you solution. And for what it's worth, these are all the tools I have access to, so my number was pretty high. It creates a little bit of tool ADD, if I'm being honest. And we'll see in a second when we talk about skills, you have to know how to use all these in order to be able to do anything with it, right? So there's an unrealistic nature to having this much. Speaking of skills, abilities, and capabilities, right? You need to have skills, you need to have abilities in order to produce anything. If you start with number one, you sort of say, of all the people that can build, that's my total talent pool, right? People that are availability to assign this work to. Number two brings us down a little bit. What platforms do those people actually have proficiency with? So we're going to lose some people right off the bat. We're going to cut some people out because they don't fundamentally have the ability to build in these tools. It's not that they won't ever have that capability, it's today they don't. Number three, who possesses a scaled mindset? So now you're taking another step down and you're culling your audience down a little bit further. So that's your group of people after you get through 1, 2, and 3. That's your opportunity to start building. But we don't want to forget about the rest of the people, right? Because we want to change this culturally. So number 4 is really important. How can we support education for tomorrow? When we go through those steps and we identify down who is left, who got left out, who doesn't know how to use the platform, who doesn't possess the scaled mindset, now we've broken our people down into a few different camps that we can design and develop programs to help them move forward, to help them learn, give them a more satisfying experience. That's important in this. It's not just about the people who can build, it's about the people who are going to be there to build tomorrow as well, right? So we want to consider all of our resources, not just those who can build today. So you're setting up phases. We've seen this slide, but I wanted to throw it back in here just so that we could refocus on what it is that we're driving towards, now that we've seen a little bit of the context. And also for the people that are going to watch this later, useful. All right, most important slide, I think, is assessing value and prioritizing. You've got to come up with a mechanism or a way to take all of your ideas and rank them, to stack them. And there's a variety of different things that you can do, but what we chose is to use a cross-dimensional axis, right? And so that's that plot over on the left. And in the upper right-hand corner, you can see we have the highest time savings with the highest impact, right? Whatever projects are represented by those dots, those are the ones you want to start with. Interestingly enough, what came out of this exercise was lowest time savings, lowest impact. We actually found some projects there that were not worth persisting, even in their manual form. You're going to know and discover a lot about your organization by going through an exercise evaluation. So consider impact to the business. Consider time savings. Time savings can be a couple things, right? That's how long does it take to develop? And it's also how many times do you have to run the thing? So we can measure time savings in both of those ways. You got to consider both. Number 3 is huge. Does the work directly tie back to a core value or strategic goal for your organization? That's another mechanism and question you can ask yourself to help eliminate work. Again, we're trying to do more with existing resources. One of the ways to do that is to get rid of stuff that's no longer valuable. So that's number 4, ultimately. What should we stop doing? Your metrics will be different. You can use many metrics. You've got to come up with a scoring mechanism because you can't do it all at once. But we do intend to do it all eventually, right? All right, so we're going to transition into a use case study. So again, priority health. We're in healthcare. And so you're all familiar with your healthcare network, right? So what is your network? Your network is the providers and the services, the laboratories, the transportation that you have access to within your healthcare plan, right? That's who you can see in network. What we're doing as a plan is we're trying to understand what you are actually using. Who are the providers you're going to? Are they the most relevant? Are they the most meaningful? Are they the most valuable? Not always just the most affordable, because we all know that lowest cost does not always equal highest quality. We are trying to lower premiums, and we are trying to grow and retain you as members. Disruption reporting is looking at one network versus another network and saying, how much disruption would you have if you switched? So if you went from Blues to Priority, if you went from Priority to HAP or Aetna or United, if you switched, how much impact would that be to you? You care about that, right? I see this doctor today. I want to be able to see that same doctor if I switch. Well, what we do also is internal disruptions, and we look at what if you switched from the PPO to the HMO? What if you switch to a high deductible health plan? All of these things, believe it or not, have different sets of providers that are willing to accept those plans and structures and setups. So internal disruptions, or disruption reporting in general, it's an industry standard report package, but it's what we do, and we do a lot of them. Here's the problem. In order to accomplish this, there are a lot of touch points. This starts with our sales teams. They have to decide that they're willing to analyze like an employer group. So your company has a bunch of employees that constitutes a grouping. They want to know, would it be better for you to move to a different network, an alternative network? Is that going to be a disruption to you? And how can we do that and provide as seamless a process move as possible? So they put in a ticket. It comes to us in analytics. We run the report package, we tailor that report, we generate that data, we create a nice presentation to give back to them so they can present it to the sales group or to the group that they're trying to sell or retain. And that whole process takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Now, that does not take the analyst 2 hours, but if you think about from the time that you identify the need to the time that the deliverable is in hand to the company at a macro level, that's about 2 hours worth of work stoppage. We do about 300 of these a year. Okay, so let's bring that back to our measurement. We have long development process cycle, and we have lots of them. So that became a pretty obvious choice for us. The next phase was storyboarding. We needed to consider the data over on the left, where it was, how it was made available to us. We believed that using a platform like Alteryx with workflow opportunities presented a good way to take that data, to merge it together, to form it. We knew that our output needed to be in Excel because that's what our customer demanded, and it needed multiple tabs, and we needed the ability to run multiple reports at the same time. And we also knew that we wanted to gather as much metadata about the process as possible. Looking back to that value, we want to know how successful we are. We want to know who's using it, how often it's being used, what it's being used for, who the providers are, where our gaps are. So it's critically important for us to understand not only how the data is being used, but how we could consume the data to inform better decisions about providers to make your experience better on the whole. So our automation, our self-service, first started with data piping, data preparation. We had data in multiple databases in multiple environments. So we began by using tasks and procedures to bring that data into the same space. For us, it was Snowflake. Brought it into the cloud, made it fast. We knew that we needed an application interface because any salesperson for Priority Health could decide to run this application against any employer group, and we needed them to be able to pick that because there's thousands of them. So if they wanted to run one, if they want to run a dozen of them, they needed to be able to specify that so that we're not running the whole entire thing all in one shot. We wanted that metadata, and we wanted to turn it into a visualization. We wanted to bring that back into Tableau and bring that in as a part of the stack and bring that data forward so that we could show the health of the process and provide insights for action going forward. We wanted it to be automated in its delivery. So we wanted it to be on demand. We wanted it to be packaged. We wanted it to be delivered to a location. We wanted notifications to go to the customer to let them know that their report was ready. And because we were cognizant of change management, we needed to train them and we needed to document the process really well because we were asking them to let go of individual tickets where an analyst was assigned to that body of work and they had interactivity with that person. We needed to get them comfortable with the idea that they were going to get the same thing, but they weren't going to talk to anybody ever. And they needed to be comfortable with that. So how'd we do? Measuring success, right? We saw immediate results. We brought this process down from that hour and a half to 2 hours to under 3 minutes. So the entire process takes that data, that prep data, it allows the user to specify a group ID, and their report can generate up to 6 networks in comparison, all in one shot, under 3 minutes, 6 different Excel files with multiple tabs apiece, created, populated, and made available. And if you remember back to the how many times a year we've run this, in the past, it was about 300. For half the year, we've hit 316. And we kind of wondered to ourselves, what's that all about? The success of this process was really in provoking curiosity. Because the end user was no longer tied to bugging us, competing for priorities, needing to catch us when we were available to do the work, they could run this 24/7. It's available on a server. And so what it's done is it's provoked people that says, I have a hunch that I might be able to save this group some money, and I wasn't told that I had to do this, but I think I might be able to accomplish this. So I can run it now, knowing that I'm not going to strain anybody, and so they do. And they've been running this experimentally and exploring twice what we saw in the past when they knew that it depended on a person. And it's being used by 28 distinct people, and we see this as a pretty huge success. The reason why this is valuable for you who pay premiums, right? I assume everybody pays healthcare premiums. If we can convince you as a group to switch to one of our preferred network slices, if you will, if you make that change, your company can experience a 6 to 8% savings in premiums simply by choosing a network that has all the same providers and yet has preferential rates if you stay within that set of providers, right? And we can extract that information. And then at the same time, what we know about that metadata is we know who to go contract with to fill those gaps to make that network more effective for you. So we see benefit on both sides of the table. So closing thoughts, couple things. You've heard me say evolving customer expectations. We need to make people comfortable with the salad bar. We need to get them away from the deli counter. Right? Your customers are used to being very prescriptive in what they want, and they don't stop until they get exactly what that is. And we have promoted an environment that said that's the way that we want to do business. And it's not anymore. What we want to do is we want to field a bunch of insights. We want to use that 80-20 rule to say if we give you 80% of what you need, and we reduce that down to 20% of the solutions that can get you there, that's more than good enough to get you directionally moving in the right space, right? And so we have to consider that the customer's vantage point is paramount in this continuum. You also have to keep up the momentum. When we were looking at that ADCAR model, we were talking about that reinforcement. When you're considering getting into self-service and automation, you have a first impression effect that you have to manage, you have to keep in mind. It has to work. It's got to be reliable. If it starts to break down, your confidence is gone, and you're going to have to reconvince them that this is worth their time and worthwhile. It has to be more beneficial than when they went to the person and iterated with you. You need to plan for regular releases of new solutions. You need to keep that momentum going. If you don't have a plan to continue to give new solutions to them, their what's in it for me starts to degrade really, really fast. And they will lose confidence and they will lose interest in you saying, I'm not going to do these individual one-off reports because I'm spending the time building you solutions. They will tell you that they don't want that solution. They want the immediacy of their report. So having regular releases helps that. You also need to protect your earned time. When you experience the gain of your time back because you automated work off your plate, don't give that back to the customer for more ad hoc. Use that to develop the next wave of self-service and automation. And that way you're going to be able to liberate yourself from the rat race and the cyclical nature of producing reports on demand. And then lastly, I think, and most importantly, and I had to point out that this slide was a joke, so bear with me. We need to use lots of buzzwords. They're very important. If you don't have them, nobody will believe that you're living in the current state and producing solutions that have any value or merit, right? So you have to use these. If you don't, it will fail. So thanks for humoring me. Thanks for joining me. So they allow us to have some time here to either go back, review slides, or ask questions. And so I'll open up the floor. If anybody has any questions, I will try to answer them. So over here, please.
So you talked about customer readiness. What do you feel about technology or IT readiness to give up that control? Where I always see the fear, oh, they'll come back and we'll be end up maintaining or justifying the outcome of the report if they start doing their own.
Yeah.
More overwhelming for us, a burden for us because we'll get more tickets.
Yeah, so the question is, we have customer readiness, but what about IT or digital services readiness? And where my mind goes to on this, and maybe you can resonate with this, is IS and digital services. They're like, well, no, we don't want you to build this because if you leave, it's going to fall back to us. Yep. And we don't want to support that, right? We don't know how you built it. It's not up to our standards. It's not in the platforms that we use, right? So when you talk about workflow and automation platforms, right, for us at Priority Health and Corewell, we have Informatica for the digital services folks, and we have things like Alteryx for the analytics people. And they're like, but they fundamentally, they don't coexist in the same space in our world. It really comes down to that change management. And I think in that particular case, it comes down to your documentation and governance. If you talk to digital services about how this is going to be beneficial for the company as a whole, I think you start to create an angle that says this is inarguable, the value, so you need to get on board or you need to get out of the way. There's a little bit of bluntness to that, and there's a little harsh reality to that I think you just have to get there, but you need to consider that they're going to have an opinion. Because most importantly, from a digital services perspective, they're going to be in charge of your schedulers, and without schedulers, there's no automation, right? So you have to help them through along in the process, and you have to give them some assurances. You might have to actually change your approach to say, I'm willing to conform a little bit to the IS standards in order for them to buy into what you're doing. So good call out. Keep all of your audiences in mind, all of your stakeholders, right? There's that buzzword. So you gotta make sure you pay attention to them. I believe this gentleman was next. Did I see you back there? To provide underlying data?
Yeah, like in one of your slides, it was like the second step, and it's like you could go in and maybe think about like an actual prompt where someone could like select what they want, like your sales people could select, I want to select these groups to compare. Where was that built? Was that like kind of in a separate software?
So one of the things that I've really come to enjoy using is a platform called Alteryx, and I'm not necessarily saying that you all have to go out and get it. do it because it's great value. But what Alteryx does is it allows you to have different branches and paths. So what we conceptualized was, okay, I got Snowflake for my data, and I've got Tableau, and I've got Alteryx, right? And Alteryx likes to call that salt, right? So Snowflake, Alteryx, and Tableau. Anyways, here I am plugging, right? So what we said is, if I send you first to Tableau, and I say, here's how much this application is being used, and here's who's using it, and here's what it's being used for, what I can do is I can enhance that and say, go here to run this application, and if you want the underlying data, you can also go here to get it, because Alteryx can give you that refined output, and it can give you all the underlying data if you so choose to produce that. And so we can make both of those things available in the same exact workflow at the same exact time that it's run without adding any more time to the process. And so in that way, we're using multiple platforms to help describe, point people to the resources, and then we build the solution to be able to produce the variety of different output types to meet the audience where they're at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It just, we're trying to push people away from like even Tableau and Power BI, they're visualization tools, not like another place to build your own report to then get Excel.
Yes.
Right? So,
Yeah, it's a real problem, but we want to get people away from that deep dive data. We want to keep them to the summary and the aggregate, but sometimes in order to get their buy-in, you've got to give a little. And so you're just going to have to gauge your audience and work them through in baby steps sometimes, I think.
it seems like a trust. They're like, I don't trust it. I
Yes.
want to look at it at the line level. Like,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that
It's almost like your willingness to present that underlying data says, I can now trust it, even though you know that they can't interpret it at all, right?
right.
Let's be honest, right? So I had a couple hands back in this direction. Yes?
So one of the epiphanies I had from this is realizing that I screwed up a lot of my self-service projects just because I tried to target full departments instead of individuals within those departments. Just because, the amount of pushback you get. And I was wondering, what do you find are the best people to take on self-service within organizations?
Ooh, to start, I would find the most frustrated people with the current process, because they're going to be the ones who are going to evangelize what you're producing for them, because guess what? You're making their job easier, and they're going to feel like you built something for them. They're going to go back to their department and teams and say, look what your analytics team did for me. And this is saving me time. It's making my job easier. And they suggested to me that they got other ideas that could be bigger and better. We should go talk to them. And I think you can evangelize from the ground up. A part of your question is, how do you address the audience at a variety of different levels, executive, departmental, divisional, individual? Some of that's going to be dictated by the projects that you choose, right? And so you just have to kind of play around with the audience and try to figure out who you can get to evangelize your success, and then they become your marketers. Yes, ma'am.
I also love Alteryx at the company that I'm interning at right now. I actually introduced them to Alteryx, and now they're looking to get licenses for that.
Very cool.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask that now, since we have Gen AI and tools such as Alteryx, how has it changed how you evaluate employee skills when you're hiring them? What experience?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So far, because it's healthcare especially, we are very careful about all those platforms because they are external to us, right? And so we have to be very careful about HIPAA and privacy and information. So we really haven't reckoned with that yet. I think most of these platforms, Tableau, Cloud, and Alteryx Cloud, they are all incorporating in Gen AI into their platforms. So I think if you start with the fundamentals and use what I'll call like on-prem solutions, I'd say if you get into the muscle memory of that, you'll be ready to take that next evolution when your organization gets to the point where they're willing to bring in that AI and machine learning capability stuff. I think we're getting pretty close on time, but maybe we can squeeze in one more question over here. Yes, sir.
You had talked about how you're seeing an increase in people using these tools, which is your direct customers.
Yes.
Have you found ways to kind of track the second order effects, like how the insights that these increased usages are generating for your company?
Yeah, we're getting there, right? As we develop these things, what we said is metadata is important. And so we had the foresight to say, we're going to start logging this information. We don't know how we're going to use it yet necessarily, but there may be insights that could be extrapolated out of that over time. And so this particular application has been running for about 9 months now, and I think we're just getting to the point where we can start to quantify and measure its success and evaluate that back against business functions to see not only do we have the time savings, but now how is that actually impacting the business, and what decisions is that provoking going forward? So we're really just on the cusp of that for at least this example that we were able to talk about there. So my recommendation is grab all of the metadata that you can. Everything you can possibly think of if you have access to infinite storage in the cloud, log all of that, because you have no idea what insights you'll be able to grab out of that a year from now when you see exactly how it performed. Then you'll be able to get those secondary and tertiary value propositions coming out of that. Good questions. I think we're at time there, and I think we're all interested in lunch, so I will stop there, and thank you again.